All right, welcome to Big Book Compendium. My name is Steve Wood. I'm a recovered alcoholic. So last time, we covered, well, we were on the chapter more, there's a solution, and it starts off with, that chapter starts off with like a warning and about, fellowship isn't enough. We got to have this spiritual connectedness, so to speak, in the spiritual solution. We covered the 3 types of alcoholics. The moderate drinker, the hard drinker, and the real alcoholic. We covered all that, and just the deepness of what a real alcoholic looks like we got into. And then last week we got into the common solution, and what we talked about was the common solution was step 4 through 9. And of course 10 is 4 through 9 later on, and 11, 12 is how we keep close to God and do his work. And so today we go a little bit deeper, and let's go to page 27. And we're going to cover the story of one of my favorite stories in this book. There's great stories in this book, but this one probably is the deepest and most meaningless. And the way I look at Alcoholics Anonymous is the official start date of AA it is June 10th, 1935, the day Dr. Robert Holbrook Smith took his last drink. But the start of AA also is traced back to a meeting that took place in, it's give or take early 1930s, maybe 31, 32 in Zurich, Switzerland. The individuals involved in that meeting were Rowland Hazard, a hopeless drunk, and a prominent, so Rowland is from this prominent Rhode Island family. I'm gonna put up a picture of him real quick. And let me give a slide. I always liked the history, so he's a good looking guy. So it's like Rowland, he comes from a very prominent Rhode Island family, and world famous, it's also ties into this as world famous psychiatrist Dr. Carl Jung, which that's him there. Very amazing. One of my heroes in this planet. So this certain American businessman, that's Rowland. So that's what we're going to get into now. So a certain American businessman had good sense, high character. So Rowland was born into one of the wealthiest families in Rhode Island, which is the East Coast of the United States, the Hazard family. And their colonial roots in Rhode Island go back to the 1600s, and that's the early settlers of the colony, of that area. And Rowland's grandmother, her name was Margaret, is credited with forming and introducing the first kindergarten to America. And his aunt was the turn of the century president of a big college called Wesley College. And then his father was president of a place called Peace Steel Manufacturing Company, which he owns, partly owned, and then he owned and was president of Solitary Process Company, which is several companies. But his grandfather was very interesting, was known as the father of American alkaline industry, which is really big. Their family's known for bringing a lot of, introducing a lot of chemicals and minerals and stuff to the new U.S. But they own very profitable companies, and one of them was Woolen Mills, and they were the major producer of army blankets during the World Wars, and they made a lot of money. And they also owned Summit Salisbury, the nation's leading producer of ovens, and pretty much all over Europe too. Its sister company was Salisbury Process Company, and with three other chemical companies, eventually created a company called Allied Chemical, which is today they over $20 million corporation. So they're still around. Rowland was a member of the board of directors of Allied until his death. He is credited as turning it into a nationwide multi-million-dollar company. He did that silver, winning silver. But you could say Rowland was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, very prominent. And rich families in those days of that era, the Hazard family was big on teaching the children values and human relations and proper, where you put the fork on the table and the spoon on the table, that type of stuff. But it was, they were big into teaching the children so values and human relations, or preparing them for family business at a young age. And so they were big on education, and they sent all their kids to the best prep schools in the world. They taught them discipline and social manners. And Rowland received a Bachelor's of Art degree from Yale, where he was nicknamed Rowdy Rowland because of his drinking. So you can already see, and people were amazed who knew him that he even graduated, because he was never in class, but he's also very rich. So, unlike his brothers, he liked the social life. And after Yale, he served the Rhode Island State Senate. And during World War I, he was a captain in the Army Chemical Welfare Department. Rowland's problems with alcohol did not lead to his dismissal from any positions he held within the family corporations, because it was covered up by the family. That's what rich families do. They cover it up. And they would have other family members cover for him. Like, so supposedly he was like the equivalence of like CEO today in one company, called president, but he was never there. But he was the one that he could talk, he had the looks, and in those days, you have to remember, alcoholics were looked at as morally weak, and a lot of them wound up in, like we talked about, asylums. So the last thing a rich family wanted was a moral weakness be exposed in the ranks. And when his father died, Rowland thought, for sure, I'm taking over the operating helm of the umbrella of all these companies. And instead is given to his 26-year-old brother, but they gave Rowland the title. So it's crazy. So Rowland was 37. He had several positions, titles within corporations, and most of them weren't even going to him, pass over. But the big thing was, in 1927, he went to traveled to Africa, and it was a big family thing to go to, and you would invite all the other corporations. They would sign contracts at these things. Rowland was in charge because he was the guy that was a great social person, and he could talk. And the trip in 27, though, was a disaster, because he wasn't allowed to drink on the other trips, but this one he had to, because he was so bad. He was, shaking and stuff. And his extreme sprees was, he was never invited back. It embarrassed the whole, family. And it was a sufficient event because his drinking was exposed to friends and investors. And so the family had to demote him and cut him loose from a lot of companies because of it, because they're going to lose stockholders and stuff. And Rowland began, seeking help. So back to the book. So we got a background of Rowland now. So who's this drunk guy they're talking about here? So for years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. So he went from one asylum to asylum to asylum, right? And like going back and forth to rehab. And remember what I explained about the asylums before, about how they keep you locked in there. It was very embarrassing. So it says in here, he consulted the best known American psychiatrists. So by 1931, he's 50 years old. He had sought treatment for alcoholism, all of the major psychiatrists in the United States, the best of the best. And remember, Rowland has limitless money. That is kind of unheard of in those days, even for rich people to have limitless money. But his family was very prominent. The best psychiatrists were very, very expensive, and most of the rich folks had enough money to see one. His family had so much money they could just keep sending him the one to the other, and none of them worked for him. Back to the book. It says that he had gone to Europe. This is 1931, placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, Dr. Carl Jung, who prescribed for him. So we saw what Jung looked like. So after Rowland ran out of these American psychiatrists, he goes to Europe, where the big three there were Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, and Carl Jung. And Rowland's first choice was Freud. He was very ill. He experimented with drugs too, and that may have been a problem. He didn't know there were, Freud was trying to get past anxiety, and he heard about this new drug called cocaine, so he was experimenting with it. So that could have been a reason there too why he was ill. Who knows? But Adler was too busy and didn't like to work with alcoholics. He just refused. So he goes to Zurich, Switzerland to see Jung. This is a huge turning point in AA. We may not be here if this didn't happen. And Jung was, because he was considered the finest psychiatrists of the time because of debts. They say Jung was the psychiatry what Einstein was the science. He was that good. And he believed, here's why it was so important. He believed in spiritual transformation. The other guys didn't, believing that spiritual experience was absolutely necessary to the well-being for human life. So Rowland stayed with him for 1 year. Let's see, go back to here. It says, though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. So he's with him a whole year. Think about that. His physical and mental condition was unusually good. Above all, this is the warning right here. I probably should have put it in italics. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Think about that for a second. Do you ever go to rehab or a bunch of meetings early on and think, there's no way I'm going to relapse? I got all this information. I'm going to listen to all these people's shares, and that's going to help me not do that. Well, our obsession doesn't, it blocks all it out. I'll never use it again. I got this, right? It says, above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind. It says, relapse is unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. So let's backtrack a little bit. A whole year with this guy who's taking him through spiritual psychiatry. So Rowland, he's like, he felt he was more than ready to return to the United States and take it on, because he was convinced he had solved his drink problem right there. And the solution was self-knowledge. So he believed that his salvation, that was his salvation. So he left Zurich, Switzerland on train, and he was drunk by the time he got to Paris. So more baffling still, he could not give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So here's this guy that's got all this self-knowledge, but when he drinks, he can't tell you why he drank. Think about that for a second. Not only did he believe he would never drink again because he knew everything, don't we all? I mean, now he's drunk. He had no clue why he did it. Like when people say, I just picked up, or I just grabbed the bottle. Well, why did you drink? No one knows, and you have to do the steps to know why you do it. Back to the book. So he returned to the doctor whom he admired and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. Very interesting, because that's what the main thing we want is self-control. There's a sense of wholeness that comes with control, because that's what wholeness is control. Jung said over the years, he worked with so many alcoholics. He says, when you see an alcoholic, you see a person searching for God, because they're trying to find wholeness. We put alcohol in our body to feel whole, to feel complete, to take things away. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatsoever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. In the doctor's judgment, he was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society. He would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was a great physician's opinion. So right there is the prognosis of for alcoholics. Hopeless, sounds like what Silk was saying to, like Lois when he talked to Bill. And Lois, where he said that, Bill's gonna die of wet brains or DTs, he's hopeless. And Jung says, I've done everything I can do for you. Clinically, psychiatry, spiritually, medicine, I can do nothing more. But look what it says next. But this man still lives, and he's a free man. A free person means you're able to go anywhere without restraints. Thank God for step 4, thank God for amends, thank for all that stuff. We can go anywhere we want to go. We're no longer confined by self-will. And the one thing is, I'm not saying this towards AA, I'm saying it's the world as a whole. Not everybody likes a free person because they see it and they can't grasp, like, oh, there's no way. They chop us down. Check this out. It says he does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on earth where other free men may go without disaster. Here's a condition: provided he remains willing to maintain a simple attitude. So there's that word again, attitude. It's all to this book. Our attitude, our simple attitude is fit spiritual condition. As a result, says 4 through 9. Step 10 keeps us there, and we grow and maintain that condition. Simple attitude. It's all about repetition with these steps. I was talking to a guy just yesterday, and he wants me to help him get back on track. Not drinking, just get past some resentments. And he's got like 12 years, and he kept referring to his inventory, not inventories. He only did one. And it's not like that. It's all about repetition in this program. Back to the book. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Oh, that never happens. Yeah. Have you ever thought that? It's a question. Ask yourself. The last thing I wanted to do, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to get well from alcohol. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and thank God I did. Why do some of us, know so many other ways? Think about all the other ways we know about too. We have psychiatry, therapists, rehab, church, all those, because we tried all of those, and the last thing that we sought was a spiritual treatment, because we can do this thing. That's what we think. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation he had with his doctor. The doctor said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. So chronic means recurring, persistent, ongoing, long-term, right? Long-term. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never seen one single case recover where that state of mind exists as it does in you. It says, our friend felt the gates of hell close on him with a clang. So that's the diagnosis he gave him right there. He's telling him what's wrong with him. And basically, when he says, I have never seen a single case recover as that state of mind, he's talking about the obsession and allergy right there. He may not use those words, but Socrates would later, put the words that we need to hear. But the type of drunk where the guy just leaves and picks up and drinks again, the real alcoholic, he goes, I can't help these people. And so he said to the doctor, and this is a typical alcoholic question: is there no exception? He wants a prognosis. He just told him he's sick. He wants a prognosis. Is there no exception? Is there another thing I can do? Yes, replied the doctor. There is. Thank God there is, right? Exceptions to cases such as yours, have been occurring since early times. Pretty way back when. Here and there, once in a while, which means not a lot, but once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. And the spiritual experience is sudden, overwhelming God consciousness, usually with desperation in there. The awakening is slowly over a period of time. They both lead to personality change sufficient to bring out recovery. So here's the thing. Jung recognized in order for an alcoholic to be set free, they need to have direct conscious contact with some type of higher power. In other words, the spiritual experience. And why did he believe in spiritual experience? because he had one himself as a child. There's no way a person is going to tell you need to have a spiritual experience unless they've had that same thing happen to them or a spiritual awakening. So Jung did have a spiritual experience as a child. It was a dream sequence, but it was like, I forget exactly the whole story. You can probably Google it and read about it. But there's, no way someone's going to suggest a spiritual experience. It's like the steps. If no one's ever done the steps, are they going to tell them, oh, you need to do the steps, But he knew. He studied Christianity. He studied Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Taoism very closely in depth. And he saw that the spiritual life within all those religions and philosophies was the very root of the psychic life. That's what Adler and Freud didn't believe. They believed that spiritual experiences were the result of a deranged mind. So imagine if he was with Freud, what would Freud tell him to do? Oh, go get to know your inner child, So they were into that inner child thing, both him and Adler. And so they would never have told Rowland to seek a spiritual solution. And Rowland could have died before he even got to Ebby or any of those people. If he had Freud and Adler, AA might never exist. And look what it says next. This is pretty deep. These occurrences are phenomenon, means unexplainable. The best psychiatrists in the world still can't explain it. So here's the best definition of psychic change, spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, spiritual conversion, so to speak, change. This is what you need, this right here. They appear. So he's describing those people that have these things. When he says they're phenomena, he's never seen that many people have, maybe none at all, but he knows they appear to be in the nature of huge emotional, that's massive, enormous, gigantic, huge emotional displacements or rearrangements. So, displacement, think about, they're rid of something, like we do in 6 and 7, rearranges. And look what happens as a result. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side. Step 5 and 6 and 7 is the casting out steps. That's where that happens. That's why the steps are so amazing, the way they click. And it's so suddenly cast on one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. It doesn't say, look, today and ask yourself, have you experienced this? Notice it does not say, learn to cope with your ideas, emotions, and attitudes. That's what a lot of people like to do. And it doesn't say a completely new set. I'm sorry, it doesn't say we learn to work on our conceptions and attitudes. No, we're alcoholics. We need to get rid of this stuff and start new. It says they're cast out, and a new set of conceptions and motives dominate them. It means takes us over. Change, psychic change. When we get a new set of conceptions and motives, we get a new attitude. The revolution begins. Out with the old, in with the new. And look what he says next. In fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. With many individuals, these methods are successful. I employ are successful, but I've never been successful with alcoholic. If your description, there's a real alcoholic. So he tried to produce an emotional rearrangement within Rowland. And he was successful unless there were real alcoholics. So what was the method he tried to produce in Rowland? There's a great Jung book I highly recommend. If you haven't read it already, it's called Modern Man in Search of His Soul. Modern Man in Search of His Soul. And he talks about how emotions influence a person's attitude. And that negative attitude could be changed through awareness of what creates negative emotions. Such as like targeting self-esteem. Jung believed that by targeting self-esteem as high self-esteem, where you think you're, where you get a resentment, where you think you're better than that person, or low self-esteem, you think you're less than, by targeting self-esteem as high or low, it persuaded emotions to change through awareness, thus changing a person's attitude. In other words, psychic change. Here's my theory. I could be wrong. My theory is that the emotional rearrangement that Jung tried with Rowland was targeting self-esteem. But the problem was he was attempting what he had never been successful with, a real alcoholic. So in essence, Jung was attempting an emotional rearrangement on Rowland, an attempt at soul surgery. He was trying to do what Bill Wilson would later be successful at with steps 4 and 5, 4 through 9, let's just say. With 4 and 5, Bill discovered a way to get to the inner workings, the inner springs of the driving forces, those instincts that produce a psychic change, gaining awareness of instincts such as self-esteem, pride, emotional security, material security, sex, the sex relates, all that stuff, which is why Jung was trying to do with Rowland and stuff. The difference is Bill was successful with real alcoholics because he was one. Jung was not. And so when Rowland heard the word spiritual experience, I mean, his ears, got a little bit wider, and here's what he thought. This is very important right here. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected, after all, he was a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed, smashed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. What Jung is very respectfully saying, while you can have good religious beliefs and ideas, those religious beliefs and ideals will not give you the necessary spiritual conversion, psychic change, awakening, and all that a real alcoholic desperately needs to overcome alcoholism. There's nothing in there. There's a spiritual lifestyle you can live and be happy and all that stuff, but you got to get through this first, right? Being a Sunday worshiper isn't enough. Church membership won't do it for you. If you wish to overcome alcoholism, it's like obsession removed, the soul surgery. This guy needed a deep-seated spiritual life centered on principles to live by. He needed to be rocking in another dimension. So more about the religion thing. I'll go to page 93. And it just gives you a little bit of a background what Jung's kind of saying here as well. And it's also important when you're sponsoring people and stuff, or if you are religious, to say, hey, this is, even though I am this is the truth right here. Because this is so right on what he talks about here. 93. Your prospects, so he's talking about sponsee, may belong to religious denomination. His religious education and training may be far superior than yours, which he might know the Bible up and down. And in that case, he's going to wonder how you can add anything to what he already knows. But this always happens, but he'll be curious to learn why his own convictions have not worked and why yours seem to work so well. He may be the example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient. Faith, to be vital, must be accompanied by self-sacrifice, unselfish, that would be sponsoring others, constructive action, 4 through 12, as it say. So faith, to be vital, must have action, especially for us alcoholics. Let him see that you're not there to instruct him in religion. Admit he probably knows more about than you do, and I do that all the time, but call his attention the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, he could not apply it, otherwise he would not have drank. That's the boom right there. A lot of people like to hear that. And how many people, we'll talk about this when we get to we agnostics, how many people, belong to religion and just believe, how many know God, millions of people believe in God. Not many people know God. A lot of people want to know about God than know God. And so many, if millions knew God, this would be a different world overnight, and it's not God up here in the clouds I'm talking about. If we started living the law of love rather than the law of fear, everything would be different. When you think about that. Back to 28. So that kind of gives you an idea of what Jung's saying there. Your religious convictions are good, and it's not going to give you the vital spiritual experience you need now, right now. 28. Here was a terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when the extraordinary experience, which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. So Jung suggested to Rowland to have a vital spiritual experience. He needed to find a religious movement to lead him to such an experience. So what would happen would be he would return to the US and seek the help of what's called the Emmanuel movement. And there was a therapist there named Courtney Baylor. Courtney Baylor was an amazing psychiatrist, and he was not far off from Jung in his ideas. The methods he used are very interesting. So Baylor used both psychological and spiritual methods, a lot like Jung. Baylor would solely work with alcoholics, though, and he did not use the word recovery. He used the word reconstruction. And he knew that a person had to rethink and remake themselves if he were to escape alcoholism. Sounds familiar, right? A big part of his style was all about spiritual discovery. Here's his therapeutic methods. It's very interesting because it ties into maybe what Ebby brought to Bill. His therapeutic style he had was emphasis on confession, self-discovery, and then he also used a tool called moral inventory. And I said this before, I have no idea what that moral inventory consisted of. Here's another one of my theories, is because Baylor was super intelligent guy, and with ideas with Jung, like the approach that his moral inventory was similar to what Bill presented in this book. And because one thing is Ebby suggests to Bill, choose your own conception of God. That's not a religious idea. It's not a Christian idea. And he was a member of the Oxford group. There had to be more. And Rowland would pass it on to Ebby. We know that. So Baylor's therapy went, was would he go through with Rowland to that? The first part would last like a couple months. And I'm going by reading his therapy, I'm guessing here, but from what I understand, he didn't stay with Rowland very long, with Baylor, Rowland has it very long. It lasted a couple months, and then he would get into a second phase and a third phase. Somewhere within those, probably the second phase, he would suggest him to go join the Oxford group. So Baylor would work with him, and then to get to the second phase was more like a spiritual awakening type stuff. He suggested the Oxford group, and Baylor knew about the Oxford group, and he knew it worked. He went to groups and enjoyed it. Rowland was able to finally get sober and have an awakening, was doing both Baylor and the Oxford group. And Jung might have planted a seed, a valuable seed in Rowland, but it was Baylor who helped him sober up and sent him to the Oxford group. So that shows me the direct link between the Emmanuel movement and the formation of Alcoholics Anonymous, not just Oxford group, like people always say. On August 1934, Rowland Hazard, back in the United States, walked into a courtroom with Oxford group members Shep Cornell and Seba Graves. Seba's father was the judge presiding over the case of Ebby Thatcher and for drunkenness. Seba's father saw that what the Oxford group had done for his son. This is very rare for a judge to do. So he put Ebby in Rowland's care. And we're going to lie over that in Bill's story already, but he put him in his care. And Rowland would take Ebby through the Oxford group principles, perhaps some of those other principles, from Baylor. Part of the Oxford group program was giving back to others, passing it on. And they did it in a very unique way. So let's say I'm taking Kim through the steps, the Oxford group principles, right? And I'm going to tell him he needs to pass it on to someone else, to give it away, and to make a list. First, make a list of people that you can help with these principles, and then go get busy. So you literally, boom, the same day, go tell someone what you just did. And, that's what they did. Name someone and boom, you're off doing it. And that was, interesting. It turned out to be Ebby right away. And that's the first person that Rowland thought about. And I'm sorry, that's the first person that Ebby thought about was Bill. And he thought of a lifelong friend. And Ebby, in turn, would bring the Oxford messages to Bill, and the aid movement was spearhead. And Rowland stayed active in the Oxford group. There's a lot of people saying he never joined AA. Kind of true, but he stayed active in the Oxford group into the 40s, and he would visit AA members at the AA clubhouse in Manhattan all the time. They played cards there and stuff, but Rowland never joined AA. And some people have said he never joined AA because he ran the Oxford Group Drunk Squad, which would spare off from AA. When everybody left there, a lot of the Oxford Group members stayed because they were the big Oxford Group members that were drunks. And so he knew he needed to hold down the fort there. So he kept it together. And when the big book was published in 1939, he had been sober 8 years, and Rowland died on December 20th, 1945. And he was running a company and very hands-on. He didn't want anyone around him. So it's pretty forgiven that he was sober, and he was 64 years old. I'm going to put up a timeline here. So look at the passing of knowledge in this. So you have Jung, and he tells Rowland about this spiritual experience. And so he sends him back to the United States to find some type of movement, therapy and stuff. So he goes and meets this Baylor guy, and Baylor gives him all the information. All the therapy he needed, and then told him to join the Oxford Group. And he was able to do the 5 principles of the Oxford Group. So doing all that. In 1934, September, he'd pass it on to Ebby. So he had some years in it. So he had other people before Ebby. Ebby wasn't the first person. Ebby, in turn, on November 1934, would bring it to Bill Wilson. And we know what happens after that. So that's a very interesting passing of knowledge timeline. And, the thing is, Jung's contribution to the evolution of Alcoholics Anonymous is a critical piece of the puzzle. Very critical. And it further shows us that AA program is not just the product of 1 or 2 men. It was the idea of spiritual change. Silkworth's knowledge that alcoholism is an illness provided the base of the 12 steps. Very interesting. I'll leave that there for a minute. So in 1961, Bill Wilson wrote Carl Jung because he felt he heard the stories. A part of him wanted to know if it was folklore, so to speak, the story of Jung, because he was so famous, and Rowland, and his grand sponsor, so to speak. So he wrote a letter to him. I'm not going to read the whole letter. You can find it online. But I'm going to read it's super long. I'm going to read the most important part of it, because he tells him the history of AA. We all know that, the stuff he's going to repeat. Here's the part I find interesting. I'm going to close this up. He says, so to Dr. Silkworth, this is Bill to Jung. This is how he closes the letter. So to you, to Dr. Shoemaker, which is head of the Oxford Group, to William James, and to my own physician, Dr. Silkworth, AA owes his tremendous gratitude, as you will now clearly see this astonishing chain of events actually started long ago in your room. It was directly founded upon your own humility and deep perception. Very many thoughts AAs are students of your writings because of your conviction that man is something more than intelligent, emotional, and $2. I love that, worth of chemicals. You have especially endured yourself to us. How our society grew and develops its traditions for unity and structured its functioning will be seen in the text, and pamphlet I have sent you. You will be interested to learn, in addition to spiritual experience, many aiders report a great variety of psychic phenomena, the culminative weight of which is very considerable. Other members have followed their own recovery in AA, but been much helped by your practitioners. A few have been intrigued by the I Ching and your remarkable introduction to that work. Please be certain that your piece is in A history is there, and our fellowship. There is no others like you. Grateful, yours, William Wilson. So about 8 months went by, or 9 months, and Bill got a letter. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a little bit long as well. But here is Jung's response to Bill Wilson. He's describing Rowland. His craving for alcohol was equivalent of a low level of the spiritual thirst of our beings for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. How could one formulate such an insight in language that is misunderstood in our days? The only right and legitimate way to such experience is that it happens to you in reality, and it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to the higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind and beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Rowland has chosen the second way, which was, under the circumstances, obviously the best one. I am strongly convinced that evil principle pervading in this world leads the unrecognized spiritual need into perception and into prediction. It is not contradicted either by real religious insight or by a wall of human community. An ordinary man, not project by action from above an isolated society, cannot resist the power of evil, which is called the apathy, the devil. But the use of such words arouse so many mistakes that one can only keep aloof from them as possible. These are the reasons why I could not give a full, significant explanation to Rowland, but I am risking it with you because I conclude from your very decent and honest letter that you have acquired a point of view above the misleading aspects one usually hears about alcoholism. Look at this part. You see, alcoholism in Latin means spiritus, and you use the same word for the very highest religious experience, as well as the most depriving poison you drink. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritualism. Spiritus defeats spiritualism. Thank you again for your letter. I remain sincerely, Carl Jung. It's very deep there, a lot of big words, but it's like he was amazed when he got that letter from Bill. Amazed. Let's go back to 28. It says, we in turn sought the same escape with all the desperation of a drowning man. Wow. I don't know if there's anyone here that's almost drowned before, but you know, I have. And first, when you're drowning, there are two options. One is to drown, and the other is to find a way out. And when you try, not drowning, a drowning person will grab onto anything in desperation. Anything. Desperation means you lost all hope, and hopeless means beyond hope. In that frame of mind, you're going to do anything you need to do to get out of that situation. It's kind of like this, like when a life raft is thrown to you, right? In that situation, you grab it without question. You're not going to say, I wonder if if it will, what color it is, you know, and I wonder if it, how much it weighs. No, you grab on it without question. You're not even thinking it's a wrap. You just see it and grab it tight. And most of all, you know that you know that wrath has worked for thousands of other people. And so you probably throw it out to someone again in your life. And when an alcoholic is hopeless and desperate, they will grab onto anything, like I said. Our life wrath is this big book, and our job is to cast it out to other people. That's what we're supposed to do. And we do it without question, because those people are hopeless and we know it works. You know, so he's asking us to take to the steps of the drowning man. Always, not the first week of it, not the first day of it, not the first short period of it, to continue to remind yourself. Look what it says next. It's one of my favorite lines in this book. What seemed at first a flimsy reed hath provided the loving, powerful hand of God. You know, if you're on that raft and you know that the waterfall is approaching and you see a flimsy reed, do you say, well, that won't work? You know, I need something stronger, like that tree, but it's too far out of the way. And I never grabbed the flimsy reed before. You reach out and you grab it, because it's your only option. Back to the book. It says, a new life has been given us. If you prefer design of living that really works, the design of living is steps 4 through 9, 10, 11, 12. That's our design for living, not some ideas about how we're supposed to act. The steps give us those ideas. The distinguished American psychiatrist, William James, in his book, Variety of Religious Experiences, which I highly recommend, religious experience, indicates on multiple ways in which men have discovered God. You know, when Bill had his spiritual experience, Evie brought him that book in the hospital. He read it really deep. It says we have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. If what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, doesn't leave anyone out, whatever our race, color, creed, race, creed, or color, are the children of a loving creator with whom we can form a relationship upon a simple understanding terms. Here's the condition. As soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. Let me read that again really quick. Whatever our race, color, creed, blah, 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 we are the children of a loving creator with whom we form a deep and simple understanding terms. As soon, we can have that, as soon as we're willing and honest enough to try. Those having religious affiliations, we find have nothing disturbing and to our beliefs, to their beliefs, or ceremonies. There's no friction among us and such matters. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. Doesn't happen in AA nowadays. They shoot everybody, you know, they get mad when people say certain things. This should be an entirely personal affair, which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present choice. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. In the following chapter, there appears an explanation of alcoholism, more about alcoholism, as we understand it. Then there's a chapter addressed to the agnostics, we agnostics. Many who once were in this class are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no greater obstacle to a spiritual experience. Further on, clear-cut, straightforward directions are given showing how we recovered. There's that word again, recovered, right? It's a formula how we recovered with clear-cut directions, this book. These are followed by 42 personal experiences. I love this. Each individual in his personal stories described his own language from his own point of view. how he stopped drinking. No, his only point of view, how he discovered the way that he discovered his relationship with God. That's a great map how to share a meeting. People want to share. I'm going to share what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. Well, the book actually says what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And it's gotten so concluded, people share that. I like to share to make sure I cover how I established a relationship with God, how I found God. That's a great roadmap to cover when you share. These give a fair cross section of our membership and a clear cut of what has actually happened in our lives. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing. I'm sure some of us have said that before. Many of us, say that, but we do not want to do the work. I have a friend that says that, like a lot of people have ideas to get healthy or lose weight, but they don't want to do the work. It's the same thing. I must have this thing, but as soon as I'm honest enough to try. So next week, we're going to start the chapter on alcoholism, more of alcoholism.